Welcome back to Missed Apex Formula E. I'm your host, Chris Stevens, and today we are back with another deep dive into a driver who was a very hot commodity in the driver market last season. Joining us from Andretti, it's Nico Müller. Nico, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Just to start off with all that hype that was built around you last season, there were certain media outlets that were very, very concerned with where you were going to be driving for this season. Does that kind of hype feel good for you? Is it distracting in any way?
I mean, it can become distracting, when you try and stay on top of what's being talked about, but I did not really care. So, to be honest, no, it was not very distracting. I think, you could say it's probably a good sign when people discuss these things because obviously, that means there are several options on the table, which is a privilege in our sport. There's very limited seats available in professional motorsports overall, especially when it comes to electric racing. Formula E is kind of the one and only there, especially at such a high level. And I've had the privilege in the past to be competing in FIA World Championships on two fronts. Obviously, Formula E being one of them, the World Endurance Championship being the other, and obviously there was kind of discussions on both sides and an interesting period, that I've been able to go through and explore different options, at least on paper, and yeah, very happy with where I ended up.
Oh, good. Those kind of meetings that you have when you're looking at other teams, how do they usually go? Because we hear stories in Formula One sometimes. They're like, oh, we snuck a driver in through the back of the hospitality so no one could see him. Sometimes the driver's doing the negotiations themselves. Sometimes they just leave it to their manager. How did things go for you during that period?
I guess the fact that there was a lot of talk about it means we didn't do a very good job at keeping things under the radar. And yeah, haven't used enough secret locations for these discussions. Maybe, yeah. In the end, we did not really have as a main priority to make absolutely sure that people didn't see us exchanging with whoever it was from different teams. And then it's a very small world as well. Everybody knows everyone in the paddock, and people talk, and you kind of get to know certain things pretty quickly about other drivers, other teams. So let's say it wasn't an extremely high priority to make sure things were kept under the radar. As long as you don't officially confirm anything, it's anyway just a rumor. So that's kind of how I try to play it. And in the end, yeah, these negotiations, obviously depending on who you negotiate with, they can be very different from one team to the other. But yeah, most of them have been very straightforward. I like to just put the facts on the table and try to understand quickly whether we can find a way of working together. And then it's obviously about yourself trying to find out what suits you best, where you see the best perspectives for the future, and the main target is to be successful. So that's the criteria you have, and then you base your decision on that.
So when you were doing these talks, I mean, obviously before you were juggling the World Endurance Championship and Formula E, we hear a lot about the clashes between the two series because there are a lot of drivers who are in both. I mean, Berlin last year felt like we had 3/4 of the grid that had to be replaced for that round, and we might have similar situations in the future as well. So I'm always curious, what is the determining factor in saying we're prioritizing WEC or we're prioritizing Formula E? Because it seems to be different for each driver.
I think it depends somewhat on what team / manufacturer you race for in whichever championship. In Formula E, there's some private teams. WEC, obviously, more and more. Yeah, these guys they're racing for a manufacturer, and they are usually less open to taking compromises, which a private team sometimes is more open to, just because yeah, I guess they are keen on securing the best possible talent or driver package overall, let's say. And in order to do so, maybe flexibility can be a good argument. So I think it really comes down to these two factors, really. Yeah, and in the end, obviously, I think we all do this because we want to be competitive, and we want to race as much as we can because that's what we love doing. And in my personal case, I've always felt like the more I race, I still feel like even at 33 years of age, you still get better. You know what I mean? In racing, it's not like when you play soccer or whatever, that you just do it every day, and you keep practicing, and at some point you're maybe fed up with practice. In racing, you get to really do it in real life very rarely. So the more you race, I feel like the wealth of experience you build later on in a career can still be very valuable. So that's why I've always been a fan of competing as much as possible. And I think it's been a difficult decision to say, look, I commit to one thing, but in the end, I prioritized being with what felt like and what still feels like the best package in terms of the team and the manufacturer I get to race with. So that has been the priority for me.
Of course, there was a little bit of a perk of you getting a bit closer to Porsche, driving for a Porsche customer team in Formula E. You got to have that IMSA outing at the start of this year as well. So are those kind of experiences important to you as well?
They are definitely. I think I've never made a big secret of being a fan of endurance racing as well as Formula E. Um, and I still love it. And it's been great fun to get back into a hypercar and do my first race in the Porsche 963 in Sebring. Um, Grateful, that with Porsche and Andretti, that has been made possible. So even though it's not a full double program, I'm still, here and there I get to taste some different sort of racing, which is cool.
Mm.
And yeah, who knows? Maybe we can do some more in the future.
Oh, I'd certainly love to see you tackling the 963 a little bit more. And I do want to talk about your incredibly varied racing history across so many different types of cars that you've been able to race. But first of all, let's talk about where you are now and Andretti. What was the first day at the new team like?
Very exciting. I think it was this exact shirt that I got to wear when I arrived. Um, and yeah, a feeling of pride, excitement. I remember, walking into the workshop in Banbury for the first time, getting to meet all the guys. Was very exciting, and we straight away got to work. Basically, it was not a lot of hanging out and chatting, but let's get this going because it's a big task. When you change teams, when you have to get used to a complete new environment. It's never easy, but a challenge that I love, and a great team to be working with, and obviously this collaboration with Porsche as well, which is kind of the base structure, let's say, of our deal, makes it very very exciting. So no, it's been yeah, feeling like a privilege from the very beginning.
Oh, good. I'm curious about the differences between a team at the back of the grid, which, all the respect to Apt at the time, but it was a sort of a tail end team, moving from a team like that to one that's won championships. Because everybody's given the same car. There's obviously big differences in terms of the hardware and the powertrain, and we hear all the time about teams how important the software that they're developing can be. So just from either behind the wheel or even when you're outside of the car and the equipment teams are using or the processes that teams are using, what is the difference between a team that wins championships and a team that's trailing at the back of the grid?
Obviously, I have to kind of base that answer on my experiences with these two teams. And the main difference, I'm sorry to say so, but it's the car. It's the package that you get to work with and get to exploit. And I think in the 2 years with Apt, there was progress. The car was getting better, and we were also getting better results back then. But I think that's been the biggest difference, really. Even though the differences are small, like you say, the cars, they all look the same, but they are not. I mean, the powertrains, they do make a big difference, especially in race mode when it comes to efficiency, and that's really been the biggest difference. Obviously, then there's different procedures, different ways of working. One One is a German team, the other one is American with some British touch. So it's a different mentality maybe to some extent, but still, when it comes down to how professional, how you know much going into detail these guys are, it's been very comparable, to be honest. I think the sort of, yeah, mentality of the people, because they come from different countries, different backgrounds, has maybe been the second biggest difference. It's I wouldn't say, just because one team has been further down the grid, you can clearly point out weaknesses in the way they're working or approaching things. Not really, not at all. Yes, they might be slightly different, but I wouldn't be able to judge even now which one is better or worse. I can't tell you. I think yeah, these are the two main points. One is the package you get to work with. The other one is the mindset people have from their probably cultural backgrounds. I would even call it. That's about it.
So we don't have a sort of glaring difference in equipment these days, do you think, in terms of what teams are using to work on the car? Because I remember when Mercedes came in, there was all this talk about, oh, they've got these super expensive air jacks that no one else has, or
They
a
didn't
few
make the
years
car
ago.
faster though.
No, that's very true. But I suppose it's sort of a small cog in a much larger sequence that has a sort of knock on effect.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you mean, but I think what makes that one difficult to answer or to find examples for something like that is that both Abt and Andretti are customer teams, which leads to the structure being very similar. They kind of have a similar number of people. They are not involved in the actual development of a drivetrain and its software, which kind of makes them being structured very similarly. If you were to compare Abt versus the Porsche Tag factory team, I think then yes, you will find differences, bigger differences. But just
Okay.
because they also have to tackle different tasks. They're not only a racing team running two cars and trying to exploit the maximum out of those two, they're actually developing a full package. So these are, I think, two different things that we also kind of have to keep differentiating when it comes to, trying to understand how people and teams operate.
You mentioned sort of culture difference between sort of an American team and
Yeah.
a German team. What does that look like from within the team?
I mean, one is language, or as the simple and first point, I guess, because I've obviously grown up in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. Racing for a German team feels like you can really express very easily in detail what you think and feel in the car or whatever, because these guys, they kind of speak your language. They've kind of grown up similarly, even though Germany and Switzerland is not quite the same. It's still close. And then the American way of going racing overall is slightly different. I love it, to be honest. I think it's super cool. I'm really relishing this experience as well. And even the way they express themselves and the words they use is different to the English we used so far in our kind of meetings that have always been held in English, even when you race for European teams. But when then that American touch comes to it, it's super super cool. And they're just, I don't know, hardcore racers in general, which I love, and no, that's super cool to see.
I love that. And was it? I mean, I'm sure this is something you developed as a young driver racing across Europe, but having to work in your second language, basically. How much of a challenge is that? Because I'm learning French at the moment, and
Cool.
I'm really, really struggling with it.
Yeah. Um, I mean, because you kind of have to start doing it relatively early on in your career, it doesn't feel weird or difficult anymore. And again, I think it's been the universal number one language in racing,
Mm.
no matter kind of what team you race for. So it does feel pretty normal in terms of just using English as the main language. It's funny because the American racing English is different to the English English. So that's,
Oh, okay.
something you have to slightly get used to sometimes. They use some different terms for whatever.
Do you
Uh,
have an example of one off the
the
top of your head?
stickers, the new tires, for example,
Oh
and
yeah,
that stuff. So
sticker set of Michelin's.
there's some of that stuff which I find cool. And I'm still learning new bits here and there. So
Mm.
pretty exciting.
Oh, nice. Actually, that does kind of bring me on to something I've always wondered about Swiss racing drivers. Because what is the motorsport culture in Switzerland? Because it is famously outlawed ever since the big Le Mans disaster in the 50s.
Yeah, not quite anymore. That has changed and opened up a bit in the last 2 3 years. So
Mm.
if we had a circuit, we could go and do some sort of racing. But obviously, there is not really any big enough racing circuit facility that we can use to actually compete, with big cars. But yeah, it's a good point. Switzerland obviously, first of all, is a very small country. Then we don't really have any, you know, mm, big racing scene within the country. Obviously, there is lots of people that go abroad and drive their nice cars on tracks like Hockenheim or Monza that are close by. And there's surprisingly many Swiss drivers that are competing at ultra high level internationally, which is great, and obviously, somewhat also a bit surprising because
Yeah.
again, we cannot really practice at all within our own country. So yeah, there is, I think, even though it's a pretty exclusive and small circle, but there is a very enthusiastic and high level racing scene that has proven to also be successful, which is cool to see. I think it also comes down to, when if you are from here and you want to pursue a career in motorsports, you would really need to commit to a pretty high level very early on in your career, because it just involves more effort, more time, more energy if you want to pursue racing. So I guess, yeah, that kind of makes the following steps maybe slightly easier. I don't know, but that's the only explanation I could find.
Because, I mean, there's yourself, obviously. Sebastian Buemi, another great Swiss racer. I'm sure there are tons more, but off the top of my head, it's you and Seb who are sort of coming to mind.
There's quite a few more, but yeah.
Yeah, there are. I was going to say Yannick Mettler as well, but I feel like most of our listeners won't know Yannick, but I know him well from doing commentary on the International
Cool.
GP Open.
Cool.
So, yeah, he's another one. But,
Neil Jani.
yes,
There's
of
quite a
course,
few.
Neil.
Edo
Yeah.
Mortara, in the end, he's Swiss.
Yes,
There-
it's Hello Swiss. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
There
There's
you
quite
go.
a few.
You're jogging my memory of the good ones here.
All good.
So how does that affect, say, like karting, for example? Are there kart tracks in Switzerland that you would start at, or are you immediately having to travel to other countries to
That's where
go?
I was a couple hours ago at the go-kart track with my son. So there is,
Awesome.
yeah. No, there's one half an hour from where I live, pretty much central Switzerland. There's another one closer to Zurich, but that's about it. If you want to go and practice, with your own race kart, that's these two kind of. There's one in southern Switzerland, but very very small. So yeah, even the Swiss karting championship, I think out of the 5 or 6 rounds they do a year, one is in Switzerland, the rest is in
Yeah.
Italy and France. So yeah, like you said, you very early on have to travel to be able to pursue, a career even in karting. We're not even talking Hockenheim or Monza. We're talking, yeah, small go-kart tracks or.
Mm. And I remember looking at your Swiss Formula Renault season, and the calendar is obviously no Swiss rounds at all. It's just
No.
across Europe. So presumably for you guys, that makes it more expensive. And because there aren't that many of you coming out of Switzerland in the first place, and as we've established, a lot of them are clearly very talented, you maybe end up fighting for the same sponsors as well.
Yeah, and that has always been a topic, but at the same time, there's always been some support in that Swiss, young driver scene. We've always had some programs, from the Swiss Federation that has found support from some, important Swiss motorsport backers that have then tried to pick out the right talent to support and stuff. So there's always been some efforts in that, and I guess they've proven that it has worked decently well. But it's never easy. Motorsports financially is a very challenging environment, and it's not become any easier lately. So, I wouldn't want to start from scratch again. It's definitely a big challenge. Lots of effort that you have to just put in, outside of the actual driving, and especially the off-season work is what's been the biggest challenge, making sure you get these budgets together to still be able to go and race. And once you make the jump out of karting into cars, it only gets more expensive. And then when you go from back in the day Formula Renault to GP3, which is now F3, was even getting another step more expensive, and that has not really changed. I think with the boom around Formula One, maybe you now have a bigger chance of being picked up early on by one of the young driver junior teams, whatever you want to call them. But it's still very challenging.
Hmm. With that in mind, is that something you would like to pursue? After you retire from racing, would you be interested in taking on a role that helps develop motorsport in Switzerland, bring international motorsport back to Switzerland?
That would be a big task if you talk about bringing back an actual international race. But I mean, I wouldn't say no now, just having not really thought in detail about it. But yeah, I think my heart does beat for motorsports. I'm proud Swiss as well, so maybe why not? But in the end, you need much more than just these two factors to be able to do something like that successfully. That would be a big task. But what I can say is that um, I live for this sport. I love it, and I will keep doing so even after my active driving career will be over one day. So yeah, I definitely see myself, still being involved in racing in one form or the other. And it's already now I get a bit of a taste of it. It's great to see young talent, kind of exploring, the sport and progressing through. So that's definitely something that I could be fascinated for and occupy myself with. That's for sure. But we'll see. I hope that is quite a few years down the road that I have to actively really think about it. So still really committed to my career, and then we'll see.
We look forward to you running the Swiss ASN in 20 years' time, shall we say?
Exactly.
So I really wanted to talk about the different cars you've driven, and particularly how you adapt to them as well, because I find it fascinating enough when drivers competing in both WEC and Formula E, and they're able to just flick between the two. But you've also driven GT3 cars. You got to drive in the premium era of DTM, the Class 1 cars as well, absolute rocket ships. One of my favorite series that sadly is no longer with us, the Formula Renault 3.5 as well. So let's start closer to home and talk about Formula E. And so what is the driving style necessary to be successful in Formula E, do you think?
I mean, it's different to anything else, really, Formula E. So when it comes to simultaneously doing whatever it is, two championships at the same time, and Formula E is one of them, I feel like it's actually making your life a little bit easier, with Formula E having its characteristic of being so unique that there's no real risk of mixing up driving styles, because it feels like driving a completely different game. So I would say Formula E, especially the Gen 3 era, it obviously has evolved a lot, and I think you really have to look at these eras isolated, I would say. So currently, and even between last year and this year, it has changed quite a lot. But I would say the mix between having to be aggressive, adaptive, but also smooth at the same time, it's very unique in Formula E. You obviously have a lot of power, a lot of torque, low grip most of the time, a tire that is very sensitive to how you treat it. So you have to be very sensitive with your inputs and understanding what the tire needs and what kind of circumstance. So I do feel a bit like you have to be more adaptive than anywhere else, and at the same time you can influence the behavior of the car more than anywhere else as well. So the flexibility between you as a driver adapting to what you have, which you need to do all the time, and being able to tune the car to what you need is bigger than anywhere else, and that makes it super complex, more complex than any other series, I would say, because you have a lot of variables you can play with, and it's very easy to get lost because you have so many. So to be on top of how you use your tools in Formula E, I think is the biggest key and the biggest challenge right, in this championship. So um, I know I've not really talked about the driving style, but I feel like that's secondary because of that fact. So um, yeah, that's how I would really sum up, the challenge of Formula E from a driver's perspective. Yeah, I hope that gives you what you wanted.
That's good. So really knowing the tools, knowing the equipment, and knowing how, say, a certain software change is going to impact the car. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah,
And
and
understanding whether you should prioritize that, the change on the car, or whether it's more efficient, better, quicker for you as a driver to adapt what the car is doing. So that's really the key, I think.
okay. So, and then presumably, when you look at your data traces, your telemetry after a session, we're talking like a nice smooth brake curve that looks like a subtle mountain peak, very smooth on the throttle, nice arcs on the steering wheel, or at least that's what you're aiming for. Might not always come out that way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is kind of a theoretical target and what we imagine this car wants to be driven like. But that can also change from track to track, weekend to weekend. That's another unique challenge of Formula E, that the tracks are so different that we get to face. We get to only really know them on simulation, and then whether the simulator does really give you the feedback that you will get in reality, but you don't really know. So that's again what I mean. Yeah, you have to be very adaptive. You have to have a target in mind, and you kind of develop a certain baseline style. That's what you can maybe call it.
Hmm.
You in these relatively low downforce cars, you're not going to smash the pedal like you do in a Formula car with high downforce, low weight. When you attack a big braking zone, you have to be sensitive. You have to feel what the tire can take in terms of slip under braking. Um, yeah, the tire maybe compared to others, is more sensitive in the way you treat it. You have to be really developing a feel for that. So yeah, again, just a unique challenge really.
So, of all the things that are happening while you're driving as well, we hear on the team radio you read out some letters and numbers in that's the sort of code. I'm not going to ask you to decrypt it for me, but presumably you're doing that what once a lap.
Yeah, the crypto stuff, yeah, in average about once a lap. But you build a habit. It
Yeah.
depends a bit on the track as well. It's some tracks you're like super busy and you don't really want to look down at the steering wheel at that point, in the lap, but some is relatively easy. So yeah, really depends.
And how many sort of setting changes on the steering wheel were you doing at that point as well?
Can also be very different. Like some tracks, and also depending on conditions, whether it's cold or hot, you need to do, many changes on the course of the race. Then there's some where you can survive with, only doing 2, 3 small adaptations. It's really, really dependent on the situation.
And are you still having to pull the regen paddle in these Gen 3 Evo cars as well?
You can do as you wish. I mean, that's
Ooh.
a question of parameterization. How do you think is the most efficient way to slow down the car in whatever situation? And I mean, you have a lot of paddles in that car. There's 6 of them. You can program them as you like, basically, depending on the manufacturer, the team, the driver. But I'm not going to give too much away there.
No. I'm sure. Oh, okay. I assumed that it was just something you put, just sort of like squeezing a trigger while you were braking with your left foot. But presumably there are some people who don't bother with the left foot then.
I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. I just know that we've played around in the past with different options, and
Mm.
in the end, it's down to you. The preferred option. You think you pick that one, and try to maximize whatever you have.
Okay. There are a couple more ones I wanted to run through. I'm conscious of time as well. So, very quickly, you got to race with one of my absolute childhood heroes, the Doctor, Valentino Rossi.
Okay.
What's racing with Valet like?
I mean, a privilege. I've rarely had so much fun on a racetrack like with him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an absolute legend of the sport, but also as a human being, he's amazing. And he's a good racing driver also on four wheels. I can tell you that he has a lot of feel. Immediately, what I found really interesting is the way he feels what the tires are doing and the way he expresses what he's feeling is very different to what we know from car racing. But learned a lot from him on that side. I have to say that was very cool. And yeah, just through and through a pure racer, which it's always cool to share time with someone like that, and then just realizing that even though he's one of the greatest of motorsports ever, he's still just a guy that loves what he's doing and is happy to share these moments with people that he likes, and he comes to the track with his group of his personal team, I would call it, that has been with him for basically his whole career, and they're just having the greatest time of their life. So he's like he's just living the dream, and he can feel that, and it's contagious. Really, it's cool.
Yeah. That's so fascinating to hear that it's like a two-way street in terms of learning then.
It is. It is. Yeah, yeah. In the end, he obviously had a lot of new things to learn, and we tried to help him with that because I kind of was one of his teammates in his first complete year in cars. So there was, definitely maybe a little bit more going that direction than the other, but still with the way, he, has developed certain techniques and ways to communicate things in his career. There's a lot that we could learn from him as well.
As always, I could keep talking about all these things for hours and hours on end, but I know that our time together is quickly running out. So I'm going to round this out with a couple of quick fire questions for you, if that's okay. So first of all, could you pick out a favorite racing memory for us from your career? Some people go for a particular win or even just a particular drive that didn't necessarily have to be a win. Anything that stands out for you?
Yeah, probably my first DTM win at the Norris Ring in 2016, because that's one I've been working towards for a long time, and the home race of Audi that they've not won for so many years, and then I had my kind of first big DTM win there. That was something special.
Good. What is the best advice you've ever received? And this one does get a lot of varied results. Sam Bird told us about how his was from his school teacher and encouraged him to pursue racing rather than his education, which seemed like a very backwards thing for us, for a teacher to say. But is there anything that sort of stands out to you as something you sort of to this day think, oh, I'm going to hang on to that advice?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of advice I was given, and some of it was, very valuable. Some of it that was like in here, out there. But I mean, it comes down to the basics really, and because I've been thrown into the world of racing, let's say, and I'm very lucky to have been so, without really knowing what I was getting myself into. And my parents also had no clue, but my dad always told me, look, treat this as the most valuable school of life, and just try and have fun, even though you don't really know what you're gonna face, and there might be so many unknown challenges coming at you, and we cannot really help you. But just see it as the most valuable school you're ever gonna go through, and then what comes out at the end, we'll find out. And I've tried to kind of still nowadays, even though school days are over, still treat it that way, and has worked quite well for me, to be honest.
That's a good rule of life, I feel like, for everyone listening. Last question, then. So when we had Lucas Degrassi on the show, he said that you were the best teammate he'd ever had. So with that in mind, who's the best teammate you've ever had?
Well, I've had a lot of very good teammates. The one I learned the most from, I think I could break it down to that. And consequently, feeling like he has been the one with the richest wealth of experience, the most complete package, was Matthias Ekström, I think. I think for me, he's still to date the most versatile racing driver out there. He's also the one that has given me, a go in World Rallycross. I've experienced firsthand with how good he is at driving anything on four wheels. Just, yeah, kind of been super impressed with him. I think he will not even be angry at me if I say he might not be the absolutely most talented driver out there, but he's, I would say, by far the most complete package I've ever come across. He's very talented again, but maybe there is one or the other one that's a bit more talented. But he has such an understanding of what's going on in a race car. First of all, when he drives it, feels what's going on. But then also, if you pull him out of the cockpit and throw him under your car, he will be able to pull the thing apart and put it back together, and it will, drive, if anything, better than before and not worse, which in my case would definitely be the other way around. And to read certain racing situations, understand how to develop a car into a certain direction that will be beneficial for him during a racing season, etc., etc. He's the number one, I think.
Excellent. Well, I think, that should be a lesson to everyone to go and watch some rallycross and learn from him.
Not only rallycross, I think the guy can drive anything.
Yeah, exactly. Clearly. And so can you, as has been clearly demonstrated with your wealth of single-seater GT, Formula E and prototype experience. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show and teaching us all about it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, again, thank you so much for your time. That does bring an end to the show. And now there are still going to be a couple of episodes, I think, before we head to the Miami E-Prix. So just make sure you're keeping an eye on that Missed Apex Formula E feed. Of course, we've had the start of the F1 season as well. So we've got a lot coming out on the Formula One channel. It's also the start of the MotoGP season as well. So go and check out our other sister show, Missed Apex MotoGP. But until the next one, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.